You won't believe how my life unraveled over something as simple as smoking on my own porch. It started on a warm Saturday morning. I was sipping my coffee, legs stretched out on the porch swing, a soft breeze blowing past my face. It was peaceful, the kind of peace I worked hard to afford. My neighborhood was quiet, the kind of neighborhood where kids rode bikes and neighbors welcomed with a wave as they passed. I lit a cigarette, a habit I picked up in college and never quite kicked. It was my little ritual: coffee, quiet, and a cigarette on the porch each morning until the morning it all went up in flames, both literally and figuratively. I had no idea the HOA was watching. 2 days later, a letter showed up in my mailbox. It was an ordinary envelope, but what was inside seemed like a slap in the face. The letter was from the Homeowners Association. It told me I had violated community rules by smoking on my front porch. Public nuisance. They called it health hazard. I was shocked. My porch wasn't public. It was part of my house bought with my hard-earned money, and they called it public. At first I laughed. I thought it was a mistake. I even called the HOA office to clarify. The woman on the other end in a cold-clipped tone told me it was no mistake. "You've had complaints," she said. "Smoking on your porch is an HOA policy violation. You've been warned." Warned? That was the first I'd ever heard of it. I asked for proof. She said the rule had been in the HOA handbook, the same 100-page booklet buried in my junk drawer somewhere collecting dust since the day I moved in. I was angry, sure, but I figured it would pass by. I did not require trouble. I stopped smoking outdoors and moved to the backyard instead. Quiet, out of view. No complaints there, but it was not enough for them. A week later, I came home from work to find my porch destroyed. I don't mean they left a note or issued a citation. I mean my porch swing was gone, the wooden railing torn out, flower pots broken, and the ashtray I kept concealed under a small table had been smashed to pieces. Everything was destroyed. It looked like a tornado had come through but only hit my house. I just stood there, jaw hanging open, trying to grasp what I was seeing. My neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Peterson, was standing across the street, eyes wide. "Did you see what happened?" I asked. She nodded slowly, looking uncomfortable. "They were here this afternoon. 3 men in uniforms claimed they were from the HOA Enforcement Committee. Said they had orders. Orders to tear my porch apart." I was sick. I called the HOA again, voice shaking with rage. The same woman answered. "It was an enforcement action," she said evenly. "The porch was a hazard to health and in violation of community standards. We were within our rights." I was speechless, my heart pounding. I asked her how they could legally demolish property I owned. "You agreed to HOA terms when you moved in?" She said, "We had the power, but it didn't feel right." None of it did. I took photos, dozens of them. I put them online along with the story. I didn't expect much, just wanted to vent. But the post blew up overnight. Thousands of comments. People were outraged. They called it an abuse of power. Others shared their own HOA horror stories. Some even messaged me privately saying what happened to me might actually be illegal. That was the first time I thought that they actually could have violated the law. I called a lawyer, a friend of mine from college actually. He read through the HOA handbook, looked at the damage, and then gave me a look I will never forget. They overstepped. He said big time. "Under the law in our state, an HOA cannot destroy or alter private property without due process. They must issue official citations, give a hearing, and only then, only with court approval, can they levy some penalties." None of that had happened. We filed a formal complaint and wrote a lawsuit. I wanted justice, not so much for myself, but for anyone else who'd been steamrolled by a gang of power-drunk neighbors with clipboards. The weeks that followed were tense. The HOA tried to spin the story. They put out a newsletter calling me a chronic offender and a disruptive influence. They even said I'd been smoking in the presence of kids, which was a bald-faced lie. My nearest neighbor with kids was 3 houses down. They had no clue how loud the internet could get. News outlets got wind of the story. Local at first, then national. Reporters showed up on my doorstep. I was on the nightly news explaining how my porch got torn up over a cigarette. It sounded ridiculous because it was, but it also made people notice. More homeowners came forward. One man in an adjacent county told me that his HOA charged him for having a garden. A woman was charged for using the wrong shade of white for her mailbox. It was insanity. When our case was finally heard in court, I was nervous. The HOA showed up with their lawyers in sharp suits, smirks on their faces. They argued I had signed the contract, that I had been warned, that they were within their rights to enforce community standards. But my lawyer stood firm. He presented the photos, the lack of proper warnings, the absence of due process, and the blatant disregard for property rights. He cited state statute, chapter and verse, showing the HOA had no legal authority whatsoever to physically destroy my porch. The judge, an old man with tired eyes, listened silently. He asked a few questions. Then he issued a statement I'll never forget. Homeowners associations were formed to protect the value of neighborhoods, not to bully and intimidate the people who live in them. We won. The court decided that the HOA had to pay for all of the repairs, plus emotional damages, attorney's fees, and a public apology. They were also put under investigation by the state HOA board. Several members resigned within weeks. My porch was rebuilt better than before. A new swing, new paint, and new planters. But the experience left scars, not just on my property, but in the way I felt about my community. I would wave at my neighbors with confidence. Now every nod seemed hollow. Funny thing is, I quit smoking shortly after, not because of the HOA, but because the whole experience made me re-examine a lot of things. My health, my stress, my peace of mind. I regained control in the best way I knew how. To this day, people still reach out to me about that story. Some thank me, some their own. Some just wonder, how did it get that far? The answer, it got that far, because too many of us don't speak up. We shrug things off. We say, it's just how it is. But when how it is becomes somebody ripping your home apart, it's time to fight back. I'm no hero. I'm just a guy who lit a cigarette on his porch and ended up in a legal fight for his dignity. But if my story can help another individual stand up for themselves, then maybe it was all worth it. Let this be a lesson to all homeowners out there. Read the fine print, know your rights, and don't let anybody, HOA or not, take your peace away without a fight. Because sometimes the real threat isn't a cigarette. It's the people who think they can control your life without consequences. What do you think about this situation? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true life tales that need to be told. Illegal. That was the first time I really thought they might have broken the law. I called a lawyer, a friend of mine from college actually. He read over the HOA handbook, looked at the damage, and then gave me a look I'll never forget. They overstepped. He said big time. According to the law in our state, an HOA can't destroy or damage private property without due process. They have to issue formal citations, give a hearing, and only then, only with court permission, can they assess some penalties. None of that had been done. We filed a formal complaint and prepared a lawsuit. I wanted justice, not for myself so much, but a friend of mine from college actually. He read through the HOA handbook, looked at the damage, and then gave me a look I will never forget. They overstepped. He said big time. Under the law in our state, an HOA cannot destroy or alter private property without due process. They must issue official citations, give a hearing, and only then, only with court approval, can they levy some penalties. None of that had happened. We filed a formal complaint and wrote a lawsuit.